Okay, this is where it gets tricky. So, I've made this complicated looking graph, which isn't so complicated when I explain it. Basically what you have is a maintenance, which is right in the center, and then as you go backwards, you start to eat less calories, you're in a deficit. Slight deficit, then a larger deficit, even larger, till you get to an extreme. And then on the opposite end, when you eat more calories in maintenance, you're in a surplus. Then a bigger surplus, a larger, and then an extreme again. So that axis, x-axis, is calories. Then on the y-axis, up and down, you have percentage. So percentage of gain and then percentage of loss. Because we're talking about muscle here, it's going to be talking percentage of muscle gain, percentage of muscle loss. So what do we have? We've got three here: good genetics, average genetics, bad genetics. So starting off with the really good genetics, what you're going to see is, as you have a slight deficit, you're going to get almost no muscle loss when you go to the left, and as you go to the right, when you overeat, you're going to get almost all of the calories going to muscle gain. And in another graph that you'll see later, it's going to have the opposite, which will be the fat, which correlates later in another graph again. So what does this tell us? As we increase the surplus, you're going to get a gradual drop in percentage of muscle gain. So even if you have really good genetics, if you are in an extreme surplus, you're going to get, say, 80% versus 100%. Just to note, these figures aren't exact, they've just made up in my head. They're just basically here to demonstrate the difference. When you undereat, you're going to get more of a muscle loss as you go to an extreme. Comparing this now with average genetics, which is the middle red, again, slight deficit, you've got a slight amount of muscle loss. As you increase the deficit, you're going to get more and more and more of a muscle loss. And similar with surplus. So if you're in a slight surplus, you're going to get a large portion of muscle gain, and if you increase that surplus, you're going to get less and less of muscle gain and more of a fat gain. And then again, with the darker being the bad genetics, you're going to have not so much of a muscle gain even at a slight surplus compared to the other two. And similarly with the other two, it's going to gradually reduce as you increase the surplus. And the opposite also applies with the muscle loss. Then we compare this with the fat gain. So what happens with fat? Well, again, if you are in a slight deficit, you're going to have most of the calories coming out as fat, which is what you want. And as you increase the deficit, you're going to have less coming out as fat and more as muscle. And then with the surplus, if you overeat, you're only going to get a small portion of those calories going to fat and being stored as fat. And as you increase your surplus, so if you overeat too much, most of those calories are going to be pushed as fat, even if you have really good genetics. So I hope everyone understands that so far. Then basically the next graph is the 2-in-1. So what would my recommendations be for dieting and how to get the best calorie partitioning? Well, what you want to do is basically stay within that slight deficit and slight surplus range. The best results that you're going to get in terms of body composition is when you stay in a slight deficit or a slight surplus. Even if you have the bad genetics, which is maybe 5% of the population, you're still going to get much more beneficial results as if you try and rush the diet and go into a large deficit. And if you try rush putting on muscle and you're eating way too much, you're going to get too much of that going as fat. So that's basically the idea of bulking slow and cutting slow. And when you do these extreme diets, the detox diets and the fasting diets and all this bullshit that they tell you, that's when you get extreme deficits, and most of the weight and most of the energy is coming from the places you don't want it to be. So it's another reason why you should avoid at all costs these extreme salad diets or whatever the hell people are telling you. A controlled, calorie restricted diet is always best. So in my next video, I will basically sum up the next two videos and explain to you what this all means now. So how can we relate the information that we've learned from the first and second video on calories into real life. Thank you for watching this video again. Please remember to like, subscribe my YouTube page and my Facebook page. Thank you guys.